Let's move on to the subject of education. In nearby Detroit, the public schools have become a national symbol of neglect and failure. That school system is $3.5 billion in debt. Officials say they could run out of money by April. I want to bring in Shaniqua Kemp. She's right here. Ms. Kemp, her 14-year-old daughter, Imani, is a student in Detroit. Shaniqua is one of 10 parents suing Detroit public schools, not for money, she says, but to improve conditions. She says she's currently leaning towards Senator Sanders. Her question will go to both of you, but we'll start with Senator Sanders. Ms. Kemp?
Thank you. Speaking of opportunities for success, in Detroit, schools open and close with no accountability or transparency to the communities that they service. Not only that, in our schools, as you stated, we have issues with rats, mold, no working water fountains, not to mention non-certified teachers, lack of accountability around transportation, special education, and so much more. With that said, our students can no longer suffer due to lack of these things or having the dilapidated issues take place. So my question is, who's going to step up? Who's going to ensure that the policies and procedures are put in place that will ensure and bring forth a successful future for our students? Because my daughter cannot wait 8 more years for success to take place at your hands, at the leaders' hands.
Senator Sanders, let's start with you.
Well, thank you very much for not being resigned to that horrendous situation, but being prepared to stand up and fight back. That's what we need all over this country.
Thank you.
And let me be very honest with you. Hard thing to say, but it is true. A great nation is judged not by how many millionaires and billionaires it has, but by how it treats the most vulnerable amongst us. And that is the children, and that is the elderly. And do you know what? We should be ashamed of how we treat our kids and our senior citizens.
Thank you.
We have a Republican leadership in Congress now fighting for hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks for the top 0.2%, but somehow we can't come up with the money to fix Detroit's crumbling public school system. Somehow we cannot make sure that Detroit has qualified and good teachers. Somehow we can't make sure that there are summer programs for your children and after-school programs for your children. Somehow we cannot do what other countries around the world do, is provide quality child care and pre-K. We have got to change our national priorities. No more tax breaks for billionaires and large corporations. We are going to invest in our children and have the best public school system in the world.
Senator Sanders, before we go to Secretary Clinton, Senator Sanders, let me just follow up with you. As president, you have to decide where to spend your political capital. There's a lot of things you want to do. Where does fixing Ms. Kemp's daughter's school and other schools, where does that lay in your list of things to do?
Not only do we have a crumbling school system in Detroit and in many other areas, we have, and everybody in this room should be embarrassed by this, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. That is a disgrace. So when you ask me about my priorities are that no, we're not going to give tax breaks to the wealthy. We're going to ask them to start paying their fair share of taxes so we can raise the money to make sure that every child in this country, in Detroit, in Vermont, gets the quality education that he or she deserves.
Secretary Clinton.
Ms. Kemp, here is what I would do as president. Number one, I would reinstate a program we did have during the 90s where the federal government provided funding to repair and modernize public schools, because a lot of communities can't afford to do that on their own. Secondly, I would use every legal means at my disposal to to try to force the governor and the state to return the schools to the people of Detroit, to end the emergency management, which I believe if you look at the data, the situation has only gotten worse with these emergency managers that have put the system further in debt. Number three, I want to set up inside the Department of Education, for want of a better term, kind of an education SWAT team, if you will, where we've got qualified people, teachers, principals, maybe folks who are retired, maybe folks who are active, but all of whom are willing to come and help. When Detroit gets back their schools, they should have all the help they can get to be able to get teachers into the classroom, to be able to find spaces while schools are being repaired. And I also would look at how we could, through the federal government, support more teachers, because we're going to have a teacher shortage in some of the hardest to teach districts, including Detroit.
Let me just follow up with the Secretary, then I'll come back to you, Senator Sanders. You've been endorsed, Secretary Clinton, by two of the biggest teachers' unions. There's an awful lot of great teachers in this country. It's an incredibly difficult job, one of the most difficult jobs there is. But union rules often make it impossible to fire bad teachers, and that means disadvantaged kids are sometimes taught by the least qualified. Do you think unions protect bad teachers?
You know what? I am proud to have been endorsed by the AFT and the NEA, and I've had a very good relationship with both unions, with their leadership, and we've had really candid conversations, because we are going to have to take a look. What do we need in the 21st century to really involve families, to help kids who have more problems than just academic problems? A lot of what has happened, and honestly, it really pains me, a lot of people have been blaming and scapegoating teachers because they don't want to put the money into the school system that deserve the support that comes from the government doing its job.
So just to follow up, you don't believe unions protect bad teachers?
You know what? I have told my friends at the top of both unions, we got to take a look at this, because it is one of the most common criticisms. We need to eliminate that criticism. You know, teachers do so much good. They are often working under the most difficult circumstances. So anything that could be changed, I want them to look at. And I will be a good partner to make sure that whatever I can do as president, I will do to support the teachers of our country.
What our campaign is about is asking people to think big, not small. And when we think big and we talk about education, we got to ask ourselves a simple question. How is it, starting at college, that hundreds of thousands of bright young people are today unable to go to college because they can't afford it? How is it that maybe your kid, and when I was growing up, we didn't have any money, were not even dreaming about going to college because they knew it was another world? So starting with the top. Now, I know some people think it's a radical idea. I don't. I believe that every public college and university in this country should be tuition-free.
Senator?
So that your child, regardless of the income of your family, knows that if she studies hard, she is going to be able to go to college. And you know what else we do? We invest in child care. Right now, you have child care workers making McDonald's wages. That is crazy.
Thank you,
Senator. I want well-trained, well-paid child care workers to give our youngest kids the best opportunities available.
I want to go over to my colleague, Don Lemon.
Anderson, thank you very much. Secretary Clinton, I want to turn now from the state of our nation's school to the state of our nation's crumbling infrastructure, which you talked a little bit about at the beginning of this debate. But beyond the Detroit schools and Flint water crisis, pipes, roads, and bridges are in need of repair. It would take trillions of dollars to fix it all. Senator Sanders has proposed a $1 trillion plan, but yours is only a quarter of that. Is your plan big enough to fix the crumbling infrastructure in this country?
Well, there's no doubt we have an enormous backlog of infrastructure repairs. Here's what I do. The Congress finally got around to passing the highway transportation bill, which should never have been partisan. It turned into being one. Partisan argument. I want to go further. I want to put $250 billion additional on top of what Congress has done. That gets us to $500 million. I want to start a national infrastructure bank. I want to capitalize it with $25 billion that I believe will leverage 10 times that. That's another $250 billion. So I'm trying to do this in a way that will gain support and be affordable, but there's no doubt we have to do more on our roads, our bridges, our tunnels, our ports, our airports, and as we talked about in the beginning here, under our ground, our water systems, our sewer systems. We have pipelines that are leaking and that are dangerous. We have so much work to be done, and we can put millions of people to work. I think my plan is a very good way to begin doing that work and to get people out there doing it.
Thank you, Secretary. Senator Sanders, critics of your $1 trillion proposal say it is yet another example of a costly plan that will never get through Congress and can't be paid for. The best infrastructure deal is what the Secretary just mentioned. The deal President Obama could negotiate with Republicans was a $305 billion highway bill. If he couldn't do more, how can you?
Well, let's begin by discussing the problem. As you've indicated, the American Society of Civil Engineers say we need trillions of dollars just to bring up our infrastructure to deal with water systems like Flint, just to bring them up to decent levels. We have suggested a $1 trillion investment. Now, you know how we're going to pay for that? I'll tell you how we're going to pay for that. Right now, this country is losing $100 billion every single year because profitable corporations are stashing their profits in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and in other tax havens. And in some cases, not paying 5 cents in federal income tax. I will eliminate that outrageous loophole, and we will raise $1 trillion. And by the way, not only do we rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, $1 trillion over 5 years creates 13 million decent-paying jobs.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. The issue of climate change has been a major talking point for both of you. I wanted to bring in Sarah Belair. She's a student at the University of Michigan at Dearborn who says she's currently undecided. Ms. Belair has a question on fracking, which for viewers is a process of oil and gas drilling that's led to a significant increase in American energy production and jobs, but also raises serious environmental concerns. Sarah, your question's for Secretary Clinton, but you'll both be able to weigh in. Sarah?
Fracking can lead to environmental pollution, including, but not limited to, the contamination of a water supply. Do you support fracking?
Secretary Clinton?
You know, I don't support it when any locality or any state is against it, number one. I don't support it when the release of methane or contamination of water is present. I don't support it, number three, unless we can require that anybody who fracks has to tell us exactly what chemicals they are using. So by the time we get through all of my conditions, I do not think there will be many places in America where fracking will continue to take place. And I think that's the best approach, because right now there are places where fracking is going on that are not sufficiently regulated. So first, we've got to regulate everything that is currently underway, and we have to have a system in place that prevents further fracking unless conditions like the ones that I just mentioned are met.
Senator Sanders,
My answer is a lot shorter. No, I do not support fracking. And by the way, Anderson, I'm glad you raised the issue of climate change, because the media doesn't talk enough about what the scientists are telling us, and that is if we don't get our act together, the planet that we're going to leave our children may not be healthy and habitable. I have introduced the most comprehensive climate change legislation in the history of the Senate, which, among other things, calls for a tax on carbon, massive investments in energy efficiency, wind, solar, and other sustainable energy. This is a crisis we have got to deal with now.
Senator Sanders, though, to Secretary Clinton's point, there are a number of Democratic governors in many states who say that fracking can be done safely and that it's helping their economies. Are they wrong?
Yes. You know, one of the differences, look, Secretary Clinton, and I've said this before, and I admit it, she has the support of all the governors, Democratic, all the senators, all the congressmen. I don't. I am not part of that establishment. I plead guilty. I happen to be a member of the Environmental Committee. I have talked to scientists all over the world. And what they are telling me, if we don't get our act together, this planet could be 5 to 10 degrees warmer by the end of this century. Cataclysmic problems for this planet. This is a national crisis. And I talk to scientists who tell me that fracking is doing terrible things to water systems all over this country. We have got to be bold now. We've got to transform our energy system to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. We've got to do it yesterday.
Secretary Clinton, before we come to you. Secretary Clinton's going to be able to respond, but Senator Sanders, you've been very tough lately. Last week, you said this about Secretary Clinton, quote, "Just as I believe you can't take on Wall Street while taking their money, I don't believe you can take on climate change effectively while taking money from those who would profit off the destruction of the planet." Are you suggesting that she's in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry?
No, what I am suggesting is that we have a corrupt campaign finance system. And instead of standing up to that finance system, Secretary Clinton has a super PAC, which is raising huge amounts of, I hate to say the word huge. Every time I say huge, it means a lot of money from Wall Street and from the fossil fuel industry. I am doing it a different way. I have 5 million individual contributors who have gone to BernieSanders.com to make a $27 contribution.
Thank you, Senator.
I don't take money from the fossil fuel industry.
Secretary Clinton?
Well, first, let me say I think I have the most comprehensive plan to combat climate change. It sets some very big goals. 500 million more solar panels deployed by the end of my first term, if I'm so fortunate to be president, and enough clean energy to power every home by the end of my second term. What I am looking at is how we make the transition from where we are today to where we must be. I worked with President Obama during the 4 years I was Secretary of State to begin to put pressure on China and India and other countries to join with us, to have a global agreement, which we finally got in Paris. So I am committed to and focused on how we make that transition. I've already said we're taking away the subsidies for oil and gas. But it is important that people understand that a president can't go ordering folks around.
Secretary.
Our system doesn't permit that. I'm going to set the goals. I will push everybody as hard as I can
Secretary,
to achieve those goals.
Just before
we will make progress on clean, renewable energy
Secretary,
and create millions of jobs through that.
Senator Sanders on the campaign trail, Senator Sanders often refers to a fundraiser in January that was hosted by executives from a firm that's invested significantly in domestic fracking. Do you have any comment on that?
I don't have any comment. I don't know that. I don't believe that there's any reason to be concerned about it. I admire what Senator Sanders has accomplished in his campaign. I have more than 850,000 donors. Most of them give less than $100. I'm very proud of that. And I just want to make one point. You know, we have our differences, and we get into vigorous debate about issues. But compare the substance of this debate with what you saw on the Republican stage last week.
Senator Sanders.
Well, let me make a couple of responses. Let me pick up on the last point the Secretary made. You know, we are, if elected president, going to invest a lot of money into mental health. And when you watch these Republican debates, you know why we need to invest in mental health. But here's the difference. Here is the difference. Not a personal difference. We just do things differently. All right? I honestly, look, we have a corrupt campaign finance system. And what Secretary Clinton is saying, and what every candidate who receives money from the fossil fuel industry or the drug companies or Wall Street say, not going to impact me. The question the American people have to ask is, why are these people putting millions of dollars into candidates if it's not
Thank
going to
you.
make a difference.
Thank you, Senator.
And that is why, by the way, that is why one of my top priorities, if elected president, will be to overturn this outrageous Citizens United Supreme Court.
Thank you very much, Senator.
And
Secretary Clinton, then we have to go.
And that is one of the many reasons we must all support President Obama's right to nominate a successor to Justice Scalia and demand that the Senate hold hearings and a vote on that successor.
We have to take a
because there
break.
are so many issues at stake. The first day of my campaign, I said, we are going to reverse Citizens United.
Thank you, Secretary.
And if we can't get it done through the court, I will lead a constitutional amendment effort
we have more
to
questions.
reverse it that way.
More questions coming up, much more of the